I apologize, I'm not a masterful PowerPoint creator, so the best we have is my website here. But I've been with the school since 2004. I've been director since 2005. And the school's a 501c3, and it was started by one of my mentors, an herbalist by the name of George Darcy, in an effort to help educate folks, our bodily health, staving off colds and flus, helping overcome chronic illnesses, feeding ourselves better. These are all a big part of it. But for me, it's also our emotional health and our spiritual health, our mental health, because we are these natural beings, and we so box ourselves off from the natural world that we often forget that connection. And in that forgetting comes things like depression and isolation and anxiety. And we see that really rampant in this culture today. So for me, a lot of the work that I do is about reestablishing a relationship to help heal ourselves, mind and body and spirit, and to be awakened to the concept that when we're walking alone in the woods, we're not really alone. We have all sorts of creatures that have their eye on us and are paying attention. And I say that sometimes in mixed crowds and get lots of funny looks. But I just want to point out that there is, at least since the early 70s, very much scientific validation to the fact that plants are sentient beings. And there's a really amazing book called Secret Life of Plants that started to kind of turn me on to that. And some of you that were around in the 70s may remember that book and the accompanying documentary that went with it that had an amazing soundtrack by Stevie Wonder. So just a little like Netflix drop in your bucket, or I'm not really sure if Netflix has it, but that book helped really bring an awakening to the scientific community that plants are sentient beings and they can communicate. And our ancestors knew that. My, many, many, many generations of hundreds and thousands of years ago, my sort of herbal ancestors that kept the doors open for the teachings that I use today about how plants are used as medicine, they didn't just stumble into the fields and the forests and use trial and error to discover medicinal plants. They used meditation, spiritual communication, prayer, and lots of other methods. So we have kind of connected with this living, breathing being that gave a little piece of itself to wake us up tonight and bring us into a space of focus and centeredness. And that's a lot of the work that I do at the School of Holistic Living. We have classes that we offer that are primarily for people of all walks of life that are just interested in learning more about connecting themselves to nature through their health as a center point for that. We have professional training programs too, but that's not really our big focus. Our real passion is helping each one of us find that connection, and through that, find a better quality of life and, of course, a better quality of health. Through those programs we've developed in the past few, and in 2006, I guess, 7 years ago, it was important for me that the general community, not just the people that I was having the chance to preach to in my classes, which are usually very intimate and usually not bigger than this size, because I kind of like that one-on-one, but I wanted a chance to help the greater community understand the way that we're affected by nature and the way that we have a relationship with nature and can be influenced by her. And a big part of that for me was understanding lunar cycles, like the new moon and the full moon. The full moon happens to be tomorrow. So if people around you at work were a little crazy today, you can probably attribute it to that in part. Maybe they're just crazy in general, but if they were more crazy today, then maybe you can attribute it to the full moon being tomorrow. Or think about hospitals and fire departments and police departments. In the 3-day period surrounding the full moon, they consistently staff more people on those days because there's always more accidents and more crime. In the state of Florida, we have a 73% increase in homicides on the 3 days surrounding a full moon. And that's been consistent since the data was kept in the 1960s. So there's these influences on our, behavior as creatures of nature. They're also influencing our garden practices. If any of you have ever gardened before or know anything about a farmer's almanac, that's basically a distillation of how the moon affects the planet Earth and affects the plants that we grow. And for a long time, I kind of thought, that's like, old wives' tales and heebie-jeebie and, like psychologically, if you believe something will happen, then it will happen. And I don't know about this farmer's almanac business. But I had a period of about 2 years where I was doing a lot of seed germination to start my garden from seeds instead of from plants. And I'd always thought I'd had a green thumb, but I'd always used starter plants to get things started. And then when I started growing things from seed, I was like so disappointed in myself and thought I had a black thumb. And then I started to be turned on to the concept of using the moon and its influences to start seeds in my garden. And I started to follow a lunar calendar when I would plant my seeds. And sure enough, my germination rates suddenly were far more successful, and I was a much happier gardener. So because of these influences and really feeling their effects on my life and watching my students and clients see their effects, we at the school started holding music and meditation circles on the new moon and the full moon. And any of you that have ever eaten at Dandelion Cafe, just a little ways away from here, we have a garden there, and that's where we hold these circles, and we've been doing that for the past 7 years. And I just had a woman comment to me at the last new moon circle that before these moon circles were held, she had no idea how often a full moon happened or what the difference was from a new moon to a full moon. And for some of us, that may seem a little silly, but in reality, we're not really taught these things, or if we are, we're not taught that they have any importance to us. Another program that we have is Herbal Clinic, a community clinic, which is a sliding scale, and it provides access to health consultations for people in our community. Last year, we had the honor of sitting with 450 people, and many of them weren't able to pay us, or brought us some eggs from their chickens or some kale from their garden, or sent us a check 3 months later when they could afford it. And some people were generous, and that's kind of what kept it going. But it's really been a service that we've provided for the last 4 years that we've really been grateful and humbled by, sitting with people and helping them find better health through using herbs and lifestyle and diet and other means of a more natural approach. A lot of the clients that we see are really disenchanted with the medical community, and the different prescriptions or procedures that they have been given have created more problems for their health than they originally started with. Many people can't afford those prescriptions or those procedures, and that's another large swath of the population that we see. And so holding that space for the community is something that we're hoping to continue to cultivate as more and more students go through our program. And one of the other pieces that was really important to us, for me as an herbalist, it's not just about let's take a pill and feel better. That's maybe an herbal pill instead of a pharmaceutical, but it's about how can we prevent ever getting sick in the first place. And a wise man named Hippocrates said, "May thy food be thy medicine, and thy medicine be thy food." And so for my entire practice as an herbalist, nutrition has always been really a centerpiece of maintaining quality health and improving our health. And one piece of that is growing our own food, finding the freshest food we can. Most of you in this room are probably very enlightened already about the virtues of organic food, not just for our bodies, but also for the planet. So I won't belabor you with that. But getting that food that is organic in its most potent form, in its freshest form, is one way we can do that is by growing it outside in our backyard. But if we live in an urban area, like many of us do, and we don't have a backyard, then where are we going to grow it? Where are we going to get our fresh food from? Well, that was my question about 8 years ago. And I went down to the Lake Eola Farmers Market, and I started to try to connect with the local farms because my students wanted to know where they could get local food, and I didn't really know what to tell them. And I went down to Lake Eola, and there was this huge spread of produce, and there were all these Dole and Chiquita boxes underneath the table. And this is strange. This is not a Kist out in Kissimmee, and they've been at that market for years. But they're seasonal, and they're usually only there for 6 to 9 months of the year, and they have very limited product selection. So then I wandered over at the Winter Park Market to the huge spread of produce, and sure enough, underneath the table, Dole and Chiquita boxes. So I really didn't know what to tell my students as far as a good source for local food, locally grown food. One of the really key things of locally grown food is that it's fresher. And the minute that you pick a vegetable or a fruit off the vine, it starts to lose nutrients. So if you're looking at feeding yourself the healthiest food you can, you want it as close to the source as possible. In the grocery store, even at Whole Foods, with all its myriad of certified organic products, if you really examine the labels, most of those are coming from places like Brazil and Chile and Argentina. And maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago were picked and were held in storage, and many of them are picked unripe, and then they're gassed, to ripen right before they're put out on the shelf, and all these different things that don't really lend them to be chock full of nutrients. So anyway, I started kind of driving around places like Christmas and Chiliota and Geneva, and like literally knocking on barn doors in an effort to build relationships. And what I found was that a lot of the farmers that were practicing in the Central Florida area didn't really have an outlet for their products, didn't really have a very accessible market, because you can't get into Publix or Whole Foods as a small farmer. And at the time, even Lake Eola and Winter Park, had a really long waiting list. And this was far before the Audubon Park Market, which I just want to give a nod to, because they're a farmer's market on Monday nights at Stardust that actually does really hold central a lot of the virtues that I did, but they weren't around at the time. So at the time, I tried to think differently and use what I had, which was a group of students that were interested in buying food from local farmers. And so we set up what we called the Homegrown Local Food Co-op as a buying club. And that buying club started with 5 small farms and 30 members who were all my students. And today it's a co-op that works with 80 farms and kitchens and has about 1,000 members, and actually has a 3,000-foot storefront on Orange Avenue by Princeton Street over near Florida Hospital. And this was a project that was really about collaboration. It was about collaborating with farms, and it was collaborating with the community to create something that's owned by the community so that it can remain true to the virtues that it started with. I'm actually not anything but a member over there anymore, which has kind of been an exciting shift in my life to sort of graduate onto the herbal projects solely. But for the first 5 years, as one of the co-founders and one of the board members, we really rolled up our sleeves, and we're kind of getting out there to meet with people and meet with farms and try to build a food network that could be collaboratively owned by the community. So the Homegrown Co-op offers 2 different options. It has an online farmers market, which is what we started with because we didn't really have a storefront, and people would pre-order from the farms and then pick up a box of food once a week. That's now been expanded to a twice-weekly online order, and also has been expanded to where the co-op will actually deliver food to people's front doors and leave it in a cooler for you if you're not home. And that was a lot about thinking differently and thinking outside of the box and using what we had, which we didn't have a storefront, but also thinking about how we could maximize the benefit of the relationship for the farms that we were working with, because a lot of the small farms, the farmer's market model isn't always sustainable for them. If you're a small farmer and you want to take your kale and sell it to a bunch of customers, and you harvest a row of kale and you take it to a farmer's market and you set up at 7 o'clock and the customers are about to come, and then all of a sudden when those flash Florida thunderstorms pops up over your head, you have to pack up all that food and take it home and feed your chickens and your family, but you're not bringing home the bacon or the kale or the vegetarian bacon or whatever the case is with you guys. And so sometimes it creates an unsustainable relationship for farms, especially for small farms. So using a pre-order model where people could buy and the farmer could harvest based on exactly what he knew he was going to sell, created a situation for a lot of these small farms where it allowed them access to customers in a way that was more affordable. In 2010, we caught the eye of Florida Hospital and their CEO, Brian Paradis, who was one of our co-op members after reading a book by Michael Pollan, which some of you may have read some of his works. And so the CEO of Florida Hospital, which is a Seventh-day Adventist organization that in theory and in philosophy really does support healthy eating. You may not experience it if you're an inpatient on one of their floors getting rounds of, cafeteria trays, but theoretically they are Seventh-day Adventist and they are really espousing healthy virtues. But we didn't really have the resources at the time to grow to provide that service. So they sponsored us with the building that we are occupying now on Orange Avenue and allowed us to move into a space where we could serve the community with a storefront that's open 7 days a week from 10 to 7. And we expanded once we moved into that facility to not just carry produce, but to also carry eggs and dairy products and meat meat and some packaged items. There's a herbal pharmacy section there, and lots of other products, several thousand of them. And so the storefront is open 7 days a week for anyone to just stop in and purchase. And the online market is open twice a week. And you don't have to be a member to use either of those services, but there are some benefits that come to membership. And one of those is that you're really actively contributing to the local community, getting involved. You have a vote on the bigger issues of the co-op, leading it into kind of the directions that it will grow into in the next couple of years. You also have benefits of being able to connect with the farmers and different tours and events and special discounts and things like that. But really beyond some of those, which the discounts add up, and those are really nice for our pocketbook and, you know, a good incentive to pay for that membership. But for me, the real piece of membership is owning where I'm getting my food from, and knowing the farmers and being able to go to their farm on a farm tour with a bunch of other co-op members and, you know, poke around and meet the chickens that are laying my eggs and see the kale plants that I'm one day going to eat, and building a relationship. So I think that food being so intimate to us, the more that we can have a relationship with it, either by growing it ourselves or by connecting with the farmers that grow it for us, that really helps us build that intimacy and develop that connection once again. And so I know that some of you may already grow things in your own garden, and some of you may already support farmers markets or co-ops. And the kind of final piece that I wanted to close with was kind of bringing us back to that connection to nature. And so one of my big pieces of work in the last 4 years has been redeveloping kind of our local Florida apothecary of herbs. If you go down to Barnes & Noble or your Bookworm, an independent bookstore, go down to Bookworm and look for an herbal book, and you pull it off the shelf, and it's going to talk about all these amazing plants. But we live in Florida, and it's going to talk about plants that are predominantly used in North America, but many of them will be very challenging for you to grow or find because we have such a unique subtropical climate here. We have a bunch of wild medicinals that are in part from the Appalachian region and in part from the islands, and in part stowaways from someone's shoe when they went to visit China or Africa, or, you know, we have this very multicultural set of, you know, botanical diversity here in Central Florida. So what I've been really focusing on in the last few years is reclaiming an understanding of how these plants are used, so that I don't have to call my friends in Carolina and say, hey, will you ship me down this, you know, so-and-so medicine? I can just go in my backyard and find it. So while we were on break, I stepped outside, and I was a little nervous for the first, like, after I got past the, like, restaurant, because I was like, oh, these people hate weeds. I forgot about that. We're in the most manicured part of town. But before I got to the end of the street, I found a couple medicinal plants. So I wanted to hand these around to you just as examples of plants that are used as medicine. Many of the plants that you'll find as weeds in your yard are also used as food. And they're all around us. The little five-fingered leaf, that's Virginia creeper, and that's been used in low country medicine and hill medicine in the Appalachian region for hundreds of years for different respiratory ailments. The second one that's being passed around is called rabbit tobacco, as it's one of its common names, or cudweed, and that's actually an herb that I use quite frequently for clients that are dealing with chest colds or respiratory infections, bronchitis, asthma, making it as a tea or a tincture preparation. Like the name suggests, it can also be dried and used as a tobacco substitute, but it doesn't contain nicotine. So for some of my clients in the clinic, we if they want to stop smoking, which is very admirable, it's not necessarily that easy to just put it down. So sometimes we use a baby step approach where we provide them an herb that they can smoke in the meantime while they're trying to stop smoking the nicotine, so that they can first get over the nicotine habit and then get over the physical habit of having something in their mouth that they're smoking. So rabbit tobacco makes a great herb for that. And for any of you that have ever used smudge or white sage for any type of spiritual practices, rabbit tobacco is also a really nice herb to dry and roll up into a smudge bundle for that. So I have probably exceeded my 10 to 15 minute allotment, and I clearly have a lot of different hats that I've been wearing in the community and have had the great honor of doing so. When I moved here 12 years ago, I thought I was going to be here for 3 months, and it's 12 years later. And it's because there's really a lot of opportunity here. I was talking with Pat right before about the fact that none of us should be bored right now. There is so much good work to do in the world at this time, whether it's supporting the arts and culture in the community, whether it's supporting the environment. I just was doing some work this morning with National Geographic, and I was working with another forager of mine, and we were kind of describing that, food, medicine, our backyards, like these are the most intimate places that we can connect with nature. And by and large, a lot of the environmental issues that we see in this world is because we've lost a connection to and a relationship with nature. And when we don't have that relationship or connection, we don't exhibit personal responsibility for our behaviors. So foraging for our medicine, for our food, growing our own food, these are a couple of examples of ways that we can reestablish that relationship. So thank you. Yes. Yeah, the Easton Market is another great project that has some connection with the Audubon Park Market. So any of you over in the Audubon Park area, that's a really great project that I think this summer they're planning to finally get it open. They're doing a lot of construction right now. And they're going to be like an indoor farmers market that'll be open most days of the week, I understand. They'll have a produce vendor and seafood and bread and a lot of artisan bakers and stuff. So that's another one. Also on Kareen Drive, I haven't had the chance to go into it yet, but there's a little store called Fresh 24. Have any of you gone into it? Yeah? Is it a good spot? Find some local food? Yes, but it's sparse. Just has a couple of farms. Yeah, cool. So Easton Winter Garden Farmers Market has really increased the local farms that they support at that farmers market. So any of you in that area. Winter Park also has added 2 or 3 other local farms. And then there's a produce thing that happens on Thursday nights in College Park on Edgewater. I think those are the only ones that I know. Those are the only ones I know of. I try to stay really up to date. So there may be others, but those are the ones that I know of. Good question. There's Crescent DeLand. In terms of restaurants that use farm ingredients, they're not. It should be noted that most of them aren't using exclusively local ingredients, because if you use exclusively local ingredients, you really cut yourself off from a lot of things that we in America think are kind of staple, which was a challenge that we had with the food co-op kind of starting out as we were building the farm network. Was we only had strawberries for the 2 months of the year that you can grow them in Florida. And at first people would just like bitch and moan, and I was one of them because I love strawberries. And we get this illusion when we go into the grocery store that we can get all these types of food all year long. But I'll have to say that cultivating the discipline to eat with the seasons and eat locally has really transformed my life. It's transformed my health. I definitely feel more healthy. I haven't had a cold in 4 years, and that may or may not be because I've been eating food from the co-op, but I'd like to think in part it is. I also am so flipping excited when blueberry season finally comes. And then I'm so devastated when it leaves, but all the tropical fruits are coming in. So then I get my weird stuff like sapodilla and mame and, all the tropical fruits. And I've really had to open myself up to eating a lot of new things. And that has been an extraordinary journey. I've really brought a lot of excitement to my cooking. I was a latchkey kid, and I mostly had microwave dinners and like junk food growing up. And so I never really was taught the joy of cooking. And it was really like an exercise to like prepare some kale and some pasta, I just wasn't really taught that. And so by eating seasonally, I was forced into like experimentation land and figuring out what these new tastes and flavors were. And just that has really been a joy. A lot of people feel a little intimidated by it. Fortunately, in this day and age, we have the internet, which is just glorious for all of its, ups and downs, wealth of resources for different ways to prepare food and different strategies for eating seasonally and eating locally. So anyway, your farm to table. Thank you. Back on track. So not all of these restaurants are going to have exclusively 100% local ingredients like places like the Co-op try to do, but they're going to have a lot. So just like off the top of my head, Crescent DeLand, B&B Junction in Winter Park, the new burger joint. Not all of their meat is from Florida, but some of it is, and they do use a lot of Florida-grown vegetables. Prato down on Park Ave, which is a sister restaurant of Luma. Both of those have a lot of good local ingredients. I think Gallopin closed, but they had a lot of good local ingredients. Ravenous Pig and Cask and Larder. A lot of these are going to be on the higher end, but that's because they're, supporting good ingredients and not like that weird, like, pink thing that you've seen gone viral around your social media that's like, this is what your chicken nugget meat is made out of. Like, you're eating real food. And the sad fact is that whether it's McDonald's or Publix or, like a restaurant, like, it's still the same weird pink stuff. And they're just cooking it in better ways. So, someone asked a question that was depressing.
One thing we do a lot here is try to bring in communication with other places. So, were you looking to other places in terms of how to get the local food scene started here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we didn't have a ton of great models in Florida at the time that we got started, except for New Leaf Market, which is a food co-op in Tallahassee that's been around since the 70s. And I will say that Homegrown Co-op was the first truly member-owned food cooperative in the state of Florida that was incorporated in the state of Florida, because Florida at the time didn't have favorable laws for cooperatives, for member-owned cooperatives. So the other two co-ops that were in existence in the 70s, New Leaf Market and Sunseed, were both incorporated in other states. New Leaf was incorporated in Minnesota and Sunseed in Wisconsin, or I might have those backwards, but either way, they had their articles of incorporation in another state so that they could be a member-owned cooperative, and we felt like that was really a strange thing to do as a local food co-op supporting everything from Florida. So we actually sort of had a purgatory period of being a project of the school and then moving into being our actual own corporation, because we really were kind of like fighting and drafting a new way of being a business in Florida. Around the time that we finally broke through those legal hurdles, Citizens Co-op got launched in Gainesville. And they're also a member-owned, local-focused co-op, and they and we have began to develop some trade routes among each other. So certain products that are growing in the cooler climate of Gainesville, or different, they have a lot more dairy options up there, things like that. So we can get their products down here to Orlando, and then we can carry up to them tropical foods that there's no way they're going to carry. And even though there's that distance or drive, the drive between Orlando and Gainesville is a lot shorter than the flight between here and Buenos Aires. So looking at I teach it to my students like looking at concentric rings. Like if you can get your food from your back smallest ring possible, then that's awesome. And if you can get it from your neighbors, then that's great. And if you can get it from your city and your county and your state or your region, that's even better. So here in Florida in the summertime, it's very difficult to grow a lot of the vegetables that we're used to eating. It's mostly only the tropical vegetables. And so we do, during the summer months, source some of our food from Georgia and from the Carolinas to supplement the tropical foods that are growing here, just because our members are going to drive across town to Whole Foods or Publix to get it anyway if we don't have it. So, and the stuff they're getting at Whole Foods or Publix is probably going to be coming from California instead of coming from Georgia or Carolina. So we've definitely made some shifts in the very religiously local model since we got started and as we've grown, just because, it's all of you whose demands we're all meeting together. So I'm not sure if I answered your question well or not. There's also lots of cooperative networks that we work with. So I spent a couple of weeks in the Boston area touring some of the co-ops that had been started up there and the CSAs, the same in Vermont. We spent a lot of time, and out in Northern California, spent a lot of time before we got started kind of researching what was going on in other areas of the community. And it's really beautiful in the cooperative world. People are very generous with their experience and their time and their advice and their counsel. And we've tried to do the same back to people like Citizens and some of the newer ventures that have gotten started to just kind of really have that collaboration across, the board. The urban farm models in Detroit are absolutely amazing. Yep. And Growing Power has a setup in Detroit too. Will Allen. You guys know who Will Allen is? Go Google him later. Wikipedia or something. He's amazing, and he's actually been a really strong force in creating urban farm models to help employ people in areas like Detroit. He also has a setup in Chicago and recently a setup in Atlanta to bring into the inner city farms on top of spaces that have been vacated by crumbling economies. So a really amazing way to turn around a space that, you know, otherwise is just going to be sitting vacant for, you know, however many years or decades. What's that? Okay, yeah. So he does a lot of work both with hydroponic and soil gardens on top of rooftops and on top of like parking lots that, you know, have been vacated by industry. And so Detroit's doing awesome things, and it's kind of amazing to think about how that space really could be such a wasteland, especially with the car industry crumbling the way that it did, and instead it's being turned into like this model that people are really waking up to and traveling to. And like, I know Gabby from Audubon Park was at Detroit sometime within the last year looking at the models that are serving them there. Absolutely. I think that one of the models that has a lot of possibility that is here in Central Florida is the building next door to the Winter Garden Theater, which has the greenhouse rooftop green sky growers on top of that building. And it in and of itself is a very small footprint, but it's growing a lot of food. And we have a lot of rooftops in this community that are just getting sunshine all day, but nothing else. So whether you're growing it for food or putting on green roofs for the reduction of power consumption, like University of Central Florida has a number of green roofs. There's a couple right on the Student Union. And by growing the plants on the roof, even if they're not plants that they're growing for food or for medicine, just having that green life there is helping them, you know, keep down their electricity bills inside with heating and cooling. So we have a lot of empty rooftops here, and I think that that's a really, you know, that's kind of the future of farming in an urban area, because really we are feeding a lot of people from the farms in Central Florida. Like I said, 5 years ago, we worked with 5 farms, and now we work with 80 farms and kitchens. And most of the farms that are growing produce like sell out all of their stuff to the co-op or 1 or 2 other markets that they do. And we have less and less green space in this area, on the perimeters of this area. But think about these small farms are selling out all of their product to the like half percentage of people that are thinking about eating local food. So if all of us suddenly had to start eating local food, like if we were forced into it, like if petroleum tomorrow was $10 a gallon and we just stopped shipping things in, or like what happened in 2004, Hurricane Charlie came through. I was living out by UCF. I didn't have power for 21 days. The Publix in my neighborhood didn't have food for 14 days because they also didn't have power. And it was kind of like mayhem, and it was so weird to see like, you know, all the like suburbanites like running around like, where am I going to get my Coca-Cola? You know, like really freaking out. But I mean, it was a great example of like how close we are to the possibility of having food desert situations in a community that doesn't have the infrastructure yet to feed itself. So just our little like tiny sliver of providing a solution is developing the relationships and the farms so that as we start to see increases in this food in the cost of food that's being shipped in, then, you know, we have a better network to support and help them build infrastructure so they can feed more of us. I also want to just really quickly, and then I know I have 2 questions, mention about the artificially low cost of foods that you get in the grocery store thanks to farm subsidies. So a lot of people kind of harp on the fact that local food is more expensive. Well, sometimes it is, absolutely. Last year, the Food Co-op partnered with a grad class at the University of Central Florida. And we did a survey of all the products that we were selling. And among produce, we were consistently lower. Among bulk goods, we were consistently lower. And among packaged goods, like your olive oil or, you know, the things that we're still shipping in, we were the same price or we were a little bit more. But even if you paid a little bit more for your olive oil, you were paying a lot less for your carrots. And so it averaged out to actually be more affordable to shop with the Food Co-op than it was to shop at Publix. So it's somewhat of a myth, although some products are going to be more expensive, but you have to compare apples to apples. If you're comparing an organic orange from Claremont to an organic orange from Claremont in the grocery store, that's a different price. That's one thing. But if you're comparing a non-organic orange to an organic orange from Claremont, or an organic orange from Brazil to an organic orange from Claremont, that's a disparity. You can't really make those comparisons because the quality is so much less if it's sat on a truck for weeks to get to you. So I just wanted to kind of point that out because a lot of times that does come up in the discussion, and I think that it's important to realize that the real cost of food is what we're paying the local farmers to produce it, and they're not making big bucks. I will tell you that from many of them being now my friends after many years. They are really struggling to survive, and a lot of times it's a labor of love to keep those farms open. But the low cost of food that we're getting with the food in the grocery store has everything to do with farm subsidies and large corporations really owning the Congress right now. So I'm not going to get into that. I'm going to answer your question over there. Plus, absolutely, and that's, it talks about on our website, like there's health and there's community building, but there's also the economy. And the more that we're keeping our money in Central Florida, the more vibrant our Central Florida economy can be, or at least the more resilient to weather through those tough times. So that's definitely a big piece of it, is supporting the people that are our neighbors so that they, in turn, can support us in our ventures. Yeah. Well, I think that one thing to consider is supporting Georgia over Argentina, like absolutely, hands down on that. But so, Terry, there's like 1 million people in the Central Florida area. Is that? Couple million. Okay. So the co-op has 1,000 members. So we're not hurting Georgia and New Orleans. And in fact, there's such a small minority of people that are literally supporting local. And so we're hearing about it a lot because local is struggling. Because if we can't support our neighbors, then our neighbors aren't going to be there, again, to support us or to just exist. I mean, the reason that I had to go around and knock on barn doors in 2006 was because there were no local farmers in practice. And a lot of new farms have come into existence since that time, but only because they had our support. But again, we're not taking away, like, profit from Publix just yet. Like, there are 1,000 members of the co-op, and they're not all shopping there every week. So I think that we're hearing a lot about it because the squeaky wheels are the ones that get the grease, and that we really are, in terms of local, whether it's art, culture, food, health, community in general, it's a really desperate time for a lot of people. And if we can't even connect neighbor to neighbor to get that support, then we're not going to be able to reach out and get that support from others. It's really the support from within our community that's the most accessible. So I think that that's a piece of it. New Orleans supporting New Orleans, Georgia supporting Georgia, Argentina supporting Argentina, and not shipping in our artificially subsidized food. Absolutely, like the situation of Orlando and Gainesville, where we're collaborating and meeting those areas that the local communities can't fill. You've been very patient. That's great. So Eating food fresh. We've talked earlier, for those of you that just came in, we were talking about the benefits of seasonal food on our health and also just a way of life. And so the closest that our food is to being picked, the most healthy that it is. So if you can pick all your food from your backyard and then prepare the meal right there and then eat it right there, then you're, the most potent nutrients possible. Freezing and canning are both methods that do preserve a lot of the ingredients, and definitely is something that, our ancestors have always relied upon. Probably many of you had a grandma with a root cellar or, someone that was canning. We're only a few generations away from these practices being a part of our home, a part of our spiritual practice, a part of our daily life. And so it's like a big thing that I talk with a lot of my students about reclaiming our heritage and reclaiming the teachings of our ancestors and bringing those into the modern world, because it's very novel to think about flying food in out of season from another country. That's only been happening in the last few decades. It's only been the last 100 years that we stopped treating a cold with garlic and lemon and honey and started going to the doctor and being unhappy until we got an antibiotic, even if it was a viral infection that doesn't even get treated by that. These are very historically recent things. And so, like a lot of people with my work in herbalism, a lot of people talk about it as alternative medicine, and I just laugh because it's not the alternative. It's this newfangled hokey pokey stuff that hasn't even been tested for a year before it goes on the market. That's the alternative. And what we're trying to seek to do is reintegrate some of those traditional practices. So you better believe that when blueberries are in season, I buy like 10 pounds and I freeze them and I ration them for the rest of the year. And they're not the basis of my diet at that point. When they're in season and they're fresh, I have blueberry smoothies every day. And once they go out of season, when I'm using from the freezer is kind of like a treat. Or like canned vegetables. Like when the roots are out of season, like the carrots are gone, then I'm using the carrots that I put up. Canning your own food is a far different nutritional value than buying canned food at the grocery store. And that's really important to keep in mind, because the processes that they use commercially degrade a lot of the ingredients, and then the containers that they store them in have a lot of chemicals that are leaching into your food. Plus, you don't know what their original starting vegetable was like, where it came from, what it looked like. So most of the canned vegetables are like the things that weren't good enough to sell in the produce section, and they get culled away and used in the canning process, so their quality is automatically a lot less than even what you're getting in the grocery store. So canning and freezing are definitely good things to, I think if our ancestors did it, like 99% of the time, it's like the safest route to go. It's like really something to consider bringing in and like using those tools that they had. Some of the things, you got to always question it. And we are advancing as a society for a reason. And there's a lot of good things that come from medical technology and, technology in general. But by and large, the answer to the question is if your grandmother did it, then it would be a good thing for you to do too. Yes, sir. Yeah, so your soil for your garden is like the food for your body. So soil is where they get their nutrients. So if you just plant in straight up sandy soil, your plants are not going to be as healthy. They're not going to contain as many nutrients for you, and they're also going to be a lot more susceptible to pests. So, and I always tell my students that soil in Florida is like a bank account, and you have to make a deposit before you can make a withdrawal. So deposits for me, soil amendments for me, are things like cow manure and horse manure, and worm compost and mushroom compost. And there's a variety of sources for all of these things that are very, very affordable. I just got a truckload full of mushroom compost for $10, and I applied it to my gardens, which I live on a third of an acre, and almost all of it is in active food production. I gave it to my school garden. I gave some to my neighbor. I had plenty to go around for $10. Compost, like manure from cattle farms or horse farms, is usually free if you have a truck. They'll just fill it right up for you. You want to be mindful that it's a cattle or horse farm that's like using good practices, you don't necessarily want them to be applying a lot of herbicide to the field and then having the cows eat that, and then your plants are going to start dying because they're being fed herbicide poop, or other different things that they might be using. But there's tons of farms, especially on the east side of town, starting around Dean Road, that are horse farms and cow farms that aren't applying anything. They're not giving their animals anything. It's really safe to use. Worm castings is another one that I use a lot of to add to the soil. Through worm compost that you can do yourself. And, if you have a compost pile, that's whenever I do like a consultation for a garden or teach a gardening class, starting a compost pile is the first thing you do to start a garden. You don't wait until you've got your garden going and then you start composting. You start it right away because you want to immediately be able to recycle those nutrients back into nutrients for the soil and not consider them as waste. There's also the Orange County dump has like compost from all of our yard waste. If we get pickup from Orlando or Orange County, all of our yard waste goes to the dump and they compost it. And if you're doing a really large area and it's not necessarily all edibles, then I think that that's great to use. But for my edibles and medicinals, I don't like to use it just because I don't really know like what my neighbor used on his lawn clippings, and there's also typically a lot of shards of plastic and glass in that. So you just want to be careful about that. But if you are wanting to build up soil for like xeriscaping, like you want to have your vegetable patch by your kitchen door, and then you want to have a big butterfly garden to bring in a lot of pollinators and to, cut out some of that St. Augustine turf, then that soil from the Orange County dump is really great. But I definitely want to highlight some resources beyond the gardening classes that I teach at the school. Simple Living Institute is another nonprofit organization. My friends Tia and Terry have been around for at least a decade doing some really good work out on the Econ River on a farm and a teaching center out there, and they have a lot of permaculture and other gardening classes. And then the Orange County Extension Office has lots of really great workshops, gardening, home canning. They do, in the past 5 years, they've been more open to organic methods of gardening, which has been of a real delight to me. And every county has an extension office and can train you in how to be an awesome master gardener. If you want to dig right in, or if you just want to get your toes in the water, they have lots of workshops and expos and things that can help with that. Yeah. Yeah, we do canning and fermenting and gardening, and it's like herbal and pretty much anything else that makes you have a good quality. I mean, we do like drumming classes, and it's kind of a very broad spectrum of things. Yeah, coffee grounds are great. They restore a lot of, they have a lot of nitrogen in them, and they add a lot of nutrients to the soil. Yeah. Maybe we'll do one more question, and then we probably have to wrap up. Unless we don't, but we probably do. And I'll stick around and chat after too.
Mine actually didn't actually comment, but I just, with respect to the cultural exchange issue, I think it's important to think about like consuming other people's local culture rather than consuming other people's generic culture. Like, if we want to consume something from New Orleans or Austin, that it be something that's culturally relevant to those locations and not just getting, we have blueberries here, why, it's not a cultural exchange to get blueberries from New Orleans. It might be a cultural exchange to get crawfish from New Orleans. So that might be one way to think about that geography issue, about local preference. Are we showing a local preference because we're trying to build up our what's unique about us and consume what's unique about them?
It's a good note to end on, but I'm happy to stick around and answer questions about the co-op or about the school. And I have some bumper stickers that say, if anything can go well, it will, because it can and it does. So I have some bumper stickers and some flyers and stuff, so I'd be happy to chat afterwards. And thank you, Terry, for sharing the stage with me this evening, and thank you, Pat, and everyone here for being awesome and hosting this event every month.